The following scenes take place at the moment when Gypsy Rose Blanchard was informed of her mother Claudine Blanchard's death in June 2015. Despite the girl's initial shock, Detective Stan Hancock soon discovers that everything was not as it seemed. This is a story where maternal love and filial love take the most twisted paths until the roles of victim and attacker are reversed. I suggest you stay until the end of this case, considered one of the most controversial in the United States of America. Claudine Petra was born on May 3, 1967, in Louisiana, USA. She was one of 5 children born to the family of Claude Anthony Petra and Emma Lois Gisclair. Little is known about that time, except that over the years, Claudine's relatives began to notice a peculiar, somewhat strange behavior in her. The young girl developed a habit of stealing from her loved ones, especially when things didn't go her way. Around the age of 20, Claudine began a romance with Rod Blanchard, a guy who was 7 years younger. Very soon, she became pregnant by him, and as was customary at the time, they got married so that the child would be born in wedlock. At that point, Claudine was 24, and Rod was 17. She took her husband's last name and lived with it until the end of her life, although the marriage was short-lived. Soon, Rod realized he wasn't in love and that the wedding had happened for the wrong reasons. Then, shortly before the child was born, the couple separated. In July 1991, Claudine gave birth to a girl, and they decided to name her Gypsy Rose. After that, the woman tried to convince her husband to abandon the idea of divorce, but he was already sure of his decision. As a result, Claudine decided to take the newborn daughter and live with her family. However, Rod had no intention of shirking his fatherly duties and continued to look after the girl. But when Gypsy turned 3 months old, everything changed unexpectedly. Claudine began claiming that her daughter had apnea during sleep and, as a result, underwent several tests in the hospital. However, they revealed no signs of the condition she described. And while this would have relieved and reassured any mother, in Claudine's case, it was almost a disappointment. From that moment, the woman began a kind of pilgrimage with her daughter through various hospitals. According to her, Gypsy's health was extremely fragile. First, she claimed the child suffered from an unspecified chromosomal disorder. Later, she said she had muscular dystrophy and forced her to use walkers. In reality, Claudine suffered from Munchausen syndrome by proxy, a mental disorder in which a caregiver fabricates or induces false symptoms in a child or patient to make them appear ill. In her case, it escalated to the point where the girl had to use a wheelchair. Because of this, her mother forced Gypsy to drop out of school, and in the end, she learned to read on her own thanks to Harry Potter books. Although Claudine worked as a nurse for some time, she was not familiar with the profession and had no desire to get a job. She knew she would receive child support from Rod for her daughter, amounting to $1,200 a month. He was a devoted father and deeply worried that his daughter was so vulnerable. It never occurred to him to abandon her to fate. Moreover, when Rod remarried, he and his new wife, Christy, often visited Gypsy. However, gradually, Claudine began to limit the time the father spent with his daughter. While the woman dealt with her daughter's alleged health issues, she also had to cope with her own mother's illness. According to some reports, she took on the care of Emma, but apparently wasn't very attentive, as the woman died in 1997, and her relatives accused Claudine of not providing her with proper nutrition and completely neglecting her hygiene. Some time later, Claudine's father rebuilt his life with another woman. Claudine and Gypsy moved in with them, at least at first glance. After some time, the woman was arrested for several violations, including writing invalid checks. Claude began to be outraged by his daughter's inexplicable behavior, which seemed to give him no peace, and suddenly his new wife showed signs of illness. That's when the man began to suspect his own daughter, as he found her attitude toward Gypsy somewhat contradictory. From that moment, the idea took root in Claude's mind that Claudine was inducing illness in the girl, that she was in an unsound state of mind, and moreover, poisoning her stepmother by adding weed killer to her food. But when Claudine was confronted with this, she simply chose to leave with Gypsy for New Orleans. Soon after, her stepmother's health returned to normal. In their new place, Mother and daughter lived in public housing and survived on Rod's child support and government assistance that Claudine received due to her daughter's alleged illnesses. By then, the enormous list compiled by the mother already included conditions such as asthma, epilepsy, hearing and vision problems, paralysis of the lower body, and damage to the digestive system. Claudine forged medical records, and moreover, her power of persuasion was such that doctors often believed the illnesses she invented for her daughter and prescribed what she asked for. In this way, Claudine was convinced she had complete control over her daughter. She gave her large doses of numerous medications to induce dizziness, nausea, and headaches. She also began feeding her through a tube inserted through the nose into the stomach. The illnesses were fake, but the girl's weakness was not, because her mother induced it herself. Additionally, she instilled habits in her that contributed to the lie. Although a muscle biopsy showed no signs of dystrophy, Claudine insisted that Gypsy had this disease and also sought treatment for other alleged problems in her daughter. During this time, the girl underwent several surgeries, and Claudine regularly took her to the emergency room for minor ailments. After Hurricane Katrina devastated the area in August 2005, mother and daughter left their half-destroyed apartment and went to a shelter in Covington, Louisiana, created for people with special needs. According to Claudine, Gypsy's medical documents, including her birth certificate, were destroyed by the flood. The following month, they were moved to Missouri, where they initially lived in a rented house. In 2008, a nonprofit organization built them a small house with a wheelchair ramp and a hot tub in the city of Springfield. The girl's joy was captured on video. This proves that happy endings happen not only in fairy tales. They are real. Meanwhile, Rod and his wife Christy very much wanted to visit them. Several times, they planned the trip in detail, but always in the days leading up to the trip, Claudine didn't answer their calls or text messages. Then, after a few weeks, she explained that Gypsy had been in the hospital. This pattern, combined with sudden hospitalizations, greatly worried the girl's father. In Springfield, to justify Rod's absence, Claudine invented a story full of lies. She instilled in everyone the idea that Gypsy's father abused drugs, was a worthless person who essentially abandoned them. By then, the endless list of the child's illnesses had been expanded by the mother to include leukemia. As for Gypsy, she still didn't attend school. One way or another, her upbringing was based on Disney fairy tales, books, and movies. In the end, this world of fantasy became the perfect escape from the life of cruel confinement, with a mother who had exploited her almost from birth. Perhaps one of the most obvious examples of the abuse Gypsy endured throughout her life was her teeth. Due to the medications her mother gave her without any reason, the girl's teeth fell out, and despite her young age, she was almost toothless. But in Claudine's opinion, this detail enhanced the impression that she had all the problems she claimed. At the same time, the woman began regularly shaving her head to imitate the appearance of a patient undergoing chemotherapy. Gypsy, feeling discomfort from her mother's new decision about her appearance, often wore wigs or hats to cover her baldness when they went out. Claudine often brought an oxygen tank and feeding tube with her, continuing to feed Gypsy liquid baby formula even though she was already a teenager. The woman also used physical violence to control her daughter. She always held her hand in the presence of others. Whenever Gypsy said something that suggested she wasn't actually sick or showed that she didn't have low mental abilities, Claudine squeezed her hand tightly. Then, in the privacy of their home, she beat her with her hands or a coat hanger. Meanwhile, Rod was very worried about his daughter's health because her mother claimed that if she caught any virus, she would die. Claudine also made it clear that she had to be with her 24/7. So, he had no chance to build normal, close father-daughter relationships. Claudine had planned everything very well. In addition to all this, Gypsy didn't know how old she was. The woman didn't allow Rod or anyone else to celebrate her 18th birthday, and the girl unknowingly reached adulthood. However, youth had its natural influence on her. No matter how much her mother controlled her, Gypsy managed to sneak online in the evenings, where she visited a Christian dating site. There, she met Nicholas Gojon from Wisconsin. Nicholas was 6 years older than her, worked in a pizzeria, and lived with his mother and stepfather. He seemed kind, but at the same time he had several secrets. He had been diagnosed not only with autism and low IQ but also with dissociative identity disorder, also known as multiple personality disorder. A few months before meeting Gypsy, the young man was arrested after being caught engaging in indecent behavior in a public place. The guy's daily life boiled down to online communication, and although he was socially awkward, he sought love. When Gypsy appeared, his dream finally came true. Soon, they started a relationship, and the girl confessed to her only friend, Alea Wood, that she would marry him and that they had even chosen names for their children. But as soon as Claudine found out she was exchanging messages with boys, she locked her in the shed in the backyard. There was only a child's bed, and Gypsy was threatened that she would stay there until the end of her days if she didn't behave. She began to long for the freedom she had always been denied. When the confinement ended, the couple resumed communication, now with more intensity. Nicholas showed heightened interest in certain erotic practices, and Gypsy happily played along. Life online. A year later, the release date of the Disney movie Cinderella was announced. Gypsy decided it was the perfect moment for an in-person meeting, and together they devised a plan. Nicholas went to Springfield. They met at the movie theater. He was dressed as Prince Charming, and Gypsy came in a white dress like Cinderella. But of course, she wasn't alone, in the company of her mother. Somehow, at a certain point, Gypsy convinced Claudine that she needed to go to the bathroom, and there they were, the two of them, in the handicapped restroom. There, they became intimate. This closeness took the couple to a new, deeper level and served as a catalyst for developing a new plan, this time to free Gypsy from her mother. However, since her boyfriend had never been involved in violence, she turned to one of his dark personalities, which, according to Nicholas, was responsible for everything that happened. On the night of June 4, 2015, Gypsy left the door of her house unlocked. When Nicholas sneaked inside, she handed him duct tape, gloves, and a knife stolen from the doctor. Meanwhile, Claudine was sound asleep. While Gypsy waited in another part of the house, Nicholas entered the woman's room and attacked her. Overwhelmed by pain, shock, and panic, Claudine shouted her daughter's name, but she didn't come to her aid, so the woman soon died. Then the couple became intimate again. After that, they tried to clean up the crime scene. Before leaving, they took Claudine's savings. To hide, they checked into a motel. Later, the couple came up with a plan to avoid capture. In particular, they planned to mail the knife and bloody gloves from Springfield to Nicholas's home in Wisconsin. Meanwhile, the guy contacted his mother and told her he planned to return home with his girlfriend, whom her mother had kicked out of the homeless shelter where they lived. While they waited for the bus that was supposed to take them to their destination, they were captured on surveillance cameras. When Nicholas's mother met them, she found it extremely strange that the girl looked so calm, given the difficult situation she was in. She asked her about her mother, but Gypsy behaved as if nothing had happened. A few days later, the young people posted on the shared profile of Claudine and Gypsy on one of the famous social networks that Claudine had died. The post was seen by acquaintances and neighbors, who immediately went to the house to make sure it was all a misunderstanding. However, no one answered their knocks on the door. Then they thought that mother and daughter had surely gone for another checkup at the hospital. But as time passed, the lack of news caused alarm, and the neighbors notified the authorities. Arriving at the scene, the police talked to some residents. It was there that Alea told them about Gypsy's new boyfriend. Having obtained a search warrant, the police entered the house on June 15, 2015. Finally, Claudine's lifeless body was discovered. Then, noticing that her daughter's wheelchair was in place but Gypsy was missing, an alert was issued for the young girl's disappearance. By tracing where the social media post had been made a few days earlier, the police were able to determine the location of the possible suspect. His name matched the one Alea had reported, and a team of officers immediately went in search of him. At the scene, there was a brief confrontation between Nicholas and the police. He was armed with a knife and refused to come out. It was unknown if Gypsy was alive, but it was assumed she might be held captive by the young man. However, when the police managed to enter the house, they found her there with a pile of money, costumes, and wigs that she and the young man had worn. Moreover, Gypsy was there of her own free will. Thus, the police learned about the true connection between them. Gradually, the case took on an increasingly tangled character. Therefore, to unravel the events, Gypsy and Nicholas were taken to the police station. At that moment, something truly unexpected happened because the young girl, who supposedly needed a house with ramps, was not paralyzed at all. Gypsy was interrogated by Detective Stan, who was determined to get to the bottom of the events from the start. He did a tremendous job establishing contact with the girl, avoiding judgment and showing no aggression. The goal was for her to feel comfortable and provide as much information as possible. "Sweetie, do you really want to bury yourself? You're digging yourself deeper, you know? No, really, I would never hurt her. Listen to me carefully, I won't play around with this, sir. I didn't do anything." It turned out not to be that simple, but not too complicated either, because after the girl's initial shock from the news of her mother's death, in 2 hours of conversation, Stan calmed her down. "I'm sorry. I lied to you from the beginning. Now I'll tell you the whole truth." Gradually, the truth emerged. "Dear, I'm proud of you. I'm proud of you. I love him very much, but it's worth helping because of his cruelty. Maybe that's how it is. He killed my mom." Although partially, Gypsy placed Nicholas at the center of the events, thereby removing much of the responsibility from herself. "He had a romantic idea that we do everything together as a team, but I didn't want that. I needed my mom and he—" "Do you mean you killed your mother?" No, sir." "So you killed your mother?" "No, sir." In the version Gypsy presented at the time, she accused Nicholas of abusing her, but the detective was skeptical and took photos to document what she claimed were bruises from his assault. No matter how the girl spoke or behaved, Stan realized he was talking to an experienced liar. In the end, it turned out that Gypsy's life had been surrounded by deception from the very beginning, a farce her mother staged for money and sympathy. Gypsy didn't suffer from leukemia or any other diseases that Claudine attributed to her. Of course, many people were hurt, but the police focused not on the deception itself, but on the crime committed against Claudine, whose autopsy showed she had been stabbed 17 times. To precisely establish what happened, Detective Angela Mahoney asked Nicholas. From this conversation, a version began to emerge that contradicted Gypsy's words. "Can you first answer the question? Did Gypsy know you were going to kill her mother?" "She asked me to do it herself." According to the guy, this was the only way Gypsy found for herself to be free and be with him. However, he confessed that he stabbed Claudine only 4 times. "Okay, I admit it. I stabbed her mom. I admit it." Music. The detective soon realized that Nicholas had serious problems. The young man claimed that 2 people lived in his head, a good one and an evil one. The evil side was named Victor. Nicholas claimed that Victor was a vampire who loved taking people's lives. During the investigation, the police discovered that Gypsy had been subjected to abuse by her mother from early childhood due to Munchausen syndrome by proxy. According to the case materials, Claudine's family did not mourn her death. On the contrary, both her father and stepmother later said she deserved such a fate. Meanwhile, preparations for the trial of Gypsy and Nicholas were in full swing. But after a year in Greene County Jail in July 2016, the 25-year-old Gypsy pleaded guilty. Whose idea was it to kill your mother? Mine. As a result, she agreed to a plea deal providing for 10 years in prison. This was the minimum sentence for second-degree murder. In the midst of the process, Rod decided to make up for lost time. He said she called him 3 to 5 times a week, and she had a wonderful relationship with her stepmother, Christy. As for Nicholas, he was also in Greene County Jail awaiting trial for his involvement in the crime. Since then, the young couple had broken up. In November 2018, Nicholas was found guilty of first-degree murder, and in February 2019, he was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Music. Gypsy's lawyer soon after stated that since she entered prison, her health had improved because she stopped taking the medications her mother gave her. While in prison, the girl gave interviews and said that there she felt freer than in her entire life with Claudine. She also stated that she knew she didn't need a feeding tube, that she could eat and walk on her own, but her mother forced her to do all that. In turn, Nicholas said that if he had known it was more manipulation than love, he might not have done it. He added that, because of his disability, he had always been quite easy to deceive. In the same year Nicholas was convicted, Gypsy met a new guy named Ken through a prison pen pal program. After a few weeks, they got engaged. However, in August, Christie confirmed to the media that the couple had called off the engagement. At every opportunity, Rod and Christie assured that they would support Gypsy after her parole, which was scheduled for 2024. On June 27, 2022, Gypsy married Ryan Scott Anderson, a native of Louisiana. The couple repeatedly sparked rumors of a breakup, and in November 2022, Gypsy wrote a letter to her family stating that she was seeking to annul the marriage. However, she later withdrew her decision. Music. On December 28, 2023, Gypsy Rose was released on parole. She is now 33 years old and has to relearn the world and integrate into society. Over the past few years, her story has become a true internet sensation, so the girl intends to use this fame to her advantage. She now has over 5 million followers on social media, and their number grows every day. Friends, what do you think about this story? Write your opinion in the comments, and also subscribe to my YouTube channel and other social networks. Links to them can be found in the description under this video. We're not saying goodbye.